Joining today's webinar. This webinar is the first in our series of webinars and during this Corona crisis. And from now on, we will host a different webinar on a different topic relating RFID in retail every week. And today's topic is the benefits of RFID in the supply chain and the DC. And we want to host these webinars because, well, we cannot make this crisis go away, but what we can do is we can share our experience and knowledge on RFID and make sure that when business is back to usual, we are all ready to continue, and we're all more ready than ever before. As I said, this is the first in our series. Next week there will be another webinar that will be about the myths of RFID. And this webinar is aimed to last around 30 minutes. And after those 30 minutes, we have reserved some time for questions. For those who just joined, you can find the Q&A section by moving your mouse over the screen. That's where you appear a menu in either the bottom or the top of the screen. And that's where you can find the Q&A section. You can type your question there, and we will answer your question at the end of today's webinar. Before we dive into the DC, before we start exploring the supply chain, I would like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Hilbert Dijkstra. I am working for NetApp in the United States. I'm based out of Boston, and I'm the Director of ID Cloud for the NetApp Inc. And I will be today's moderator. And today I'm joined by Tom Viewiger. Tom, can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, Hilbert, thank you for the brief introduction. My name is Tom Viewiger, working for NetApp in Germany. And as a consultant, I work with brands and retailers that are going or actually already implementing RFID and see where this great and fascinating technology can fit in the supply chain.
Thank you, Tom. Then what we will cover today, we will focus on RFID within the DC, but before we do that, we want to make sure that we're all on the same, we all have the same starting point. So we will briefly give a brief introduction into RFID and the benefits of RFID, and then we will start to look how those benefits apply in the DC. So we'll explore what the different read points are that you could apply RFID in the DC to, and then we will give our opinion, our approach to which read points in this DC RFID makes the most sense. We then will explain what the value is that RFID will bring in the DC, and that will be followed by two examples of successful deployments that we have done. And this is also where we will explain that not every DC is the same. There's not one blueprint approach to deploying RFID in DC. You really need to understand what your business objectives are and what your challenges are in your DC to understand where RFID will add value. So we'll explain that by discussing those two examples. And then in the end, we will briefly look at how a DC can connect to what you're doing in your store and how those two data streams can come together, providing stock visibility in an EPCH platform. And that will be followed by a Q&A section. For those of you who are not familiar about NetApp, some brief information about NetApp. We are working with retailers all over the world, helping them with their RFID initiatives. And therefore we have quite some experience with RFID, both in the store and in the DC. And we want to share that experience in those webinars. So some quick information on NetApp you can find on this slide. And then something about RFID. So when we talk about RFID, we mean RAIN RFID, also known as UHF RFID. And there are, in our opinion, four main benefits of RFID. And the first one is bulk reading. So RFID is a technology, or a RAIN RFID is a technology that will allow you to read a lot of items really fast. And this is, for instance, very useful when you want to do a stock count or an inventory count within your store environment. The second benefit of RFID is distance reading. So the distance between the item that you want to read and the reader can be quite big. It can be up to 5 meters or 15 feet. And that's, for instance, very useful when you want to locate movement of items, when you want to check what's going from A to B within your store, or when you use RFID for article surveillance and you want to check which items are leaving your store. The third benefit is that there's no need for optical contact between the reader and the item that you want to read. So this allows you to read all the items that are in an enclosed box without the need to open the box. For instance, very useful in applications where you want to check what has been coming into your store, for instance. And the fourth benefit is the data capacity. So you can store quite some data on an RFID label, on an RFID chip. And this allows you to not only store the article information, the UPC or the AM, but you can also apply a serialized element, to that code, which allows you to create a unique item for that specific item, which allows you to track that item through a DC to a store on an individual base. So before we dive into the DC, I would like to ask you to get a little bit of an understanding where you are in your journey. Who of you are already implementing RFID in your organization? So right now you should see a poll coming up. And yes, there the poll is. Please answer this question. Give you some time to answer this question, whether you're already implementing RFID or whether you are maybe still in the exploring phase or completely new to the technology. See a lot of answers coming in. Give you 10 more seconds to answer this question. Okay, great. Let's close the poll and let's share the results. So we have a nice mix of people today in today's audience. We have some people that already are familiar with RFID, just over half of the audience, and there's also some people that are a little bit newer to the technology and are not yet implementing RFID in the organization. So we have a nice mix today. So thank you for responding to that. Let's stop sharing the results and continue. Okay, so when we are looking at an RFID application, there are three main components that we identify. And the first component is the read point. And the read point is the interaction, or this is where the interaction between the RFID reader and the RFID label happens, and where the RFID reader will read the content from the RFID label. The second layer to an RFID application is the user application. This is where the user will interact with the RFID reader. This is where the user can see the information coming from the reader. But this is also the layer where the data is, for instance, sent to another system, like an ERP system or a warehouse management system. And then the third layer that sits on top of that is the EPCS repository. The EPCS repository is a fancy word for a database where you can store all this data that started in your read point, and you can now store all that data in that EPCS repository, which allows you to track the entire journey of an item. We'll come back to this at the end and explain how the EPCS repository connects the data from a DC with the data from a store. And the benefit of each layer is also different. So the first benefit of that read point is process efficiency. So you can replace an existing process that's maybe happening by barcode with RFID. So this will allow you to do that faster and therefore save time. The benefit of the user application layer is stock accuracy. And then the third benefit is merchandise visibility. So by combining all these different points, you now are creating visibility throughout all the different read events that you've had, and therefore create visibility throughout the history of that specific item. This is where I would like to hand it over to Tom. Tom, can you take us into the DC?
Yes, thank you, Hubert. And now let me take you with me on a journey into a DC. And since we're not allowed to travel these times, let's look into a virtual DC. As you know, a distribution center, or DC in short, is a warehouse with products that shall be distributed to the retail stores or to fulfill customer orders. And the process flow typically starts with the receiving process, where the items, the deliveries are coming in from the point of origin, from your manufacturer, from the producer. Then they are stored in the storage area. in that environment, you might need to do some stock checks, typically on barcode basis. And later, if the customer orders are coming in, the items and the products need to be picked and packed accordingly into boxes, bags, totes, whatsoever. It might be necessary to also add some value-added services with special price tags or security tags. And finally, products are shipped out again. So this is the typical process flow. And before we dive deeper into the specific use cases and see where RFID can or should be applied, I have a question to you again. We start another poll. And if you take the technical benefits into consideration, like Hilbert already mentioned, with the bulk read, the distance reading, read it in a closed box, what is your opinion? What do you think at which point in a DC does RFID actually make sense? So poll is already started. Yeah? So you got one click, please. We do it another 20, 25 seconds. I also see the first answers already coming in. And we show you the potential steps once again: receiving, storage, picking, packing, value-added services, and finally the shipping. So what do you think where this fascinating technology, UHF RFID, makes most sense? Okay, I see that your answers are coming in. That means we will end the poll and share the results. It's quite diverse. There are different processes you would like to cover. Actually, receiving is the winner, but we also have stock checks, for example. So let's look a little bit deeper into the specific use cases. What we have learned from various implementations is that it turned out to be successful with a phased approach and not with a big bang. It's not meant that RFID as a technology just shall eliminate and substitute barcode processes, but we should look into where the business impact of the technology is the biggest. And specifically, this is what we've learned to start with the packing verification. When we talk about verification, it follows a specific guiding principle. And this guiding principle is that there's a verification of a read result, which is the truth, because the RFID labels have been actually registered with a target stock. And in the case of the packing verification, this could be a packing list. Why are we starting here? And this is to make sure that the sales channels are actually supplied accurately. This process is meant to check that everything that is going out and leaving the DC is correct, so the merchandise is correctly available in the stores and in other sales channels. It should be, by the way, right before shipping. This is why we do it at the packing point, that you are still able to react on any identified and given discrepancies. So as a second step, we move back, so to say, to the receiving, to apply RFID at the inbound verification. Again, it's the same guiding principle, comparing the RFID read result with the target. The target in this case could be an ASN, the advanced shipping notification, to identify if there are any under or over deliveries and check delivery compliance from your suppliers. This is to make sure that the DC can work on correct stock levels and that your operations are accurately done. And finally, if you have applied already those two steps and covered those processes with RFID, you register everything that's going in and you register everything that's leaving the DC on the unique item level. So the RFID chip carries a unique identifier, which is typically the SG-TIN, which is the serialized global trade item number. And this is a serialized part added to the product number. If you have realized that, you have a 100% item level visibility in your DC and a much greater transparency of your stock levels in the warehouse. Okay, then let's show you some practical examples. Let's start with an inbound verification. Here you see how it actually looks, how a typical RFID read point is structured. It's a tunnel, so we try to call it or give it a nickname, call it the barbecue. And you see there's shielding necessary. Sometimes RFID is just too good. The radio waves can cover and register items with a distance, like Hilbert mentioned, of up to 5 meters or 15 feet. So we need to make sure that they are not flying around like crazy, so to say, and only register those products that are in the box. There are a few dozen, a few hundred items in that box, and if it's moving through the tunnel, everything is registered. In the meantime, the user application is comparing that read result with the target, and you might have, for example, such kind of like a traffic light system. If everything is correct, it's green, everything is fine, and if any discrepancy and inaccuracy is identified, there's an exception handling process. Might be either manual, so then someone needs to take off the box, or automated, then that box is conveyed to the next station, which is an exception handling station. Okay, let's move on. Another example, which is the packing verification read point. The read point itself is actually doing exactly the same. It's a shielded device, so the RFID reader is shielded to make sure that only the content of a box is registered. It's just a different process. So this can be operated by one person only. While you saw at the goods inbound verification, for example, that someone needs to put the boxes on the conveyor and someone needs to take them off. In that case, this can be fully operated by one person alone. There's an ever-growing need for another use case that is also happening after packing, and this is the Ecom verification. The difference is that it's less items. A typical Ecom order might be only 1 or 2 products, maybe 3 or 4, but the process is already structured that someone needs to pack that into a bag or into a box on a table. And here RFID shall help to make that verification step easier and seamless, because with RFID and the reader that is integrated in the table, it's not necessary anymore to scan a barcode or to fill out a list or to do something on the screen. So it's actually a seamless verification of Ecom orders to make sure that customers receive the right products. By the way, this read point can also be used to assign a non-sellable status for click and collect products. So if you as a retailer or a brand send click and collect items to the stores that are picked up there, you can assign a status that they are not registered as sellable stock. Or if you are operating in a multi-brand environment and you are not sure if your suppliers are already tagging and equipping the products with RFID labels, you can use such a station to check if there's an RFID label, because if it's registered, it's green, and if not, then it's not there. Okay, I would like to give you some practical examples, coming back to the specific benefits of process efficiency, stock accuracy, and merchandise availability. As Hilbert already mentioned before, we have picked 2 examples from our customers, both, by the way, located in Spain, operating a multiple number of own stores, but also the wholesale channel. If you look now into the process efficiency on the left side, the first customer reports that the verification processes, both in inbound and in the packing verification, is 3 times faster. And the 3 times faster comes with another organizational change. To make sure that stock accuracy is right, they moved from a 10% random check to 100% verification, which means they are 3 times faster, at the same time increasing the number of registered units by 10 times. And last but not least, the result is 100% real-time visibility of all products in the DC. A similar picture is what we have at the right side with the other client. They are saving 600 labor hours per month with automated inbound and packing verification processes. And what they also did is they also did an organizational change. They come from a 5% random check to 100% verification. So by increasing the number of verified products and units by 20, they still have a tremendous saving of labor hours per month. And finally, also they can report on 100% real-time visibility of the stock levels in their DC. So this is the moment I would like to hand over back to my colleague Hilbert, who guides you a little bit through all the additional benefits with RFID and the EPCIS as a real-time stock visibility platform.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, so now you have created that visibility in your DC, and now we can connect that to what's happening in your store, and maybe also to what you want to do with RFID in your factories, if that's something you're interested in. And now you have those 3 different silos, and you can connect the data coming from those 3 different silos and combine that into one platform. And that's what we call the EPCS repository. And that's very valuable because now that EPCS repository becomes that single source of truth. And that single source of truth can be very beneficial, for instance, in an omni-channel world. So now you have one stock pool for your one inventory data pool where that you know which items are at what location at which exact moment. So if an order comes in for Ecom, you know exactly what the best location is to fulfill this item from. So by starting a project in a DC, you can create that visibility, that one stock layer to create that real-time stock visibility across all your different channels. And then when we look at the different values, so again, we spoke about 3 different pillars that drive the value of RFID in DC: the process efficiency, the stock accuracy, and the merchandise visibility. So I think Tom already gave a very clear example of those 2 retailers that were both saving time by replacing a barcode process with an RFID process. So it made their existing processes more efficient and thereby saving labor cost. And then from a stock accuracy perspective, you're now able to verify what's coming into your DC and also verify what you're shipping out of your DC. And that will solve the inaccuracies where they originate. So if you have an issue, if there's an issue from a supplier with the merchandise that they're sending to your DC, you spot that at the moment when it arrives in your DC, and then you can fix it at that moment. And it's also when you are shipping items out to either your own retail stores or maybe to your retail partners, your wholesale channels that you are using, you now also are sure that you're sending out the right items. And especially when you look at sending items to your wholesale partners, this can avoid chargebacks. So that's also one of the key value drivers by creating stock accuracy in your DC. And then when we look at merchandise visibility, there are 2 different elements. So first of all, there's the item traceability. So now you know where the item originates, which you can use to combat or make sure to combat brand authentication. So you make sure that that item is actually made by your factories and was shipped through your supply chain. And this will also help you to identify items found on gray market. And then the last benefit from this merchandise visibility is the unified stock pool. So as I just mentioned, that EPCS repository will create one real-time source for all stock information. And this can really help you to boost your omnichannel. So, Tom, can I ask you to maybe share also some insights in what you see for the outlook to supply chain operations with RFID? Is there something that we can expect after this crisis, or maybe during the crisis, from RFID in the supply chain?
Yes, of course. I must say that I'm not a prophet, and I do not really know how the situation looks like after the lockdown. What we can say is that nothing will be as it was before, for sure, and certainly there are some tendencies that we already saw accelerating now, especially with regards to the omni-channel growth. So brands and retailers will sell even more online. Already people now switch the sales channels if they are not able to go to brick and mortar stores. They do their purchases online, and so the adoption rate of online shopping will certainly grow, which means that the stock in the supply chain will flow more dynamically through different sales channels, because we expect that the capacities of DCs and warehouses will not grow. But if the demand for fulfillment of online orders grows, it might be necessary to use, for example, the stores as omni-channel hubs, as mini hubs, as we say, and fulfill directly from the store. The other way around, customers will send items back that they sold online to the DC, but maybe they give it back in the store. So as a consequence, there will be an accelerated demand in supply chain digitization in general, because tracking and tracing is essential. If we look specifically into benefits that RFID can bring with those things happening or going to happen, then yeah, RFID in general helps determining the exact origin of supply, the status of stock, but also the available inventory and its exact location, the supply chain. And this shall help to fulfill customer orders more agilely. So second point is, we know already that the return rates in the online business are higher than in brick and mortar. So some retailers and brands report returns up to 50%, which means when the online business and online shopping is growing, also the number of returns will grow. Again, when DCs cannot easily increase their capacity, the processes need to be structured more efficiently. And here RFID shall support an efficient registering and verifying of the return goods in times of growing return rates. So just by doing that seamlessly and automatically, all the return goods shall be more efficiently be handled and registered. And last but not least, a better and improved real-time stock information based on RFID data shall help for a better and improved forecasting, because the data foundation itself is better, more real-time, and thus can help for a more demand-driven planning of the supply. Yeah, a lot of things going on. I think now it's time for your questions and answers. So we got a few more minutes. I hand it over back to Hilbert. He will be your moderator for all your questions. So please feel free to add your questions directly to the chat panel.
Thanks, everyone. Please use the Q&A section to ask your questions, and we will answer some questions live. So there's a first question. So Tom, if you implement receiving and packaging, and that will give you 100% visibility, would you still advise to perform scans with an RFID scanner, like stock scans?
Yeah, there are two perspectives towards that question. The one is the information and data perspective. The other one is the legal aspect. And of course, if you scan everything that's going in and leaving, then you know what's in your DC. On the other hand, you might want to know its exact location, like a shelf position. In that case, RFID is very often too good, because the radio waves are flying around. It might be necessary to do some spot checks on the location level. This also helps for legal and auditing reason. But generally, we see more and more brands and retailers who do not do any more stock checks with a mobile device anymore, since they totally rely on the RFID data coming from inbound and outbound.
Okay, thank you, Tom. A quick question came in from whether we will share our slide deck. At this moment, we are not planning to share the slide deck to all attendees. We are planning to publish a recording. If you have a specific request, and if you would like to use this slide for something else, please reach out to someone at NIDA, and we can discuss that on a case-to-case basis. And then there's another question, Tom, and this would be regarding someone that is deployed RFID with one of our competitors, and they ask if we can implement, or if they can integrate that also with NIDA. So I think how I would summarize this question is, okay, I'm using hardware and a solution in this DC from one of your competitors. Can I connect that to the NIDA platform?
Yeah, so the NIDA platform, the EPCIS repository, the product name is ID Cloud, by the way, is hardware agnostic, which means what we are doing, we are connecting various read points from the whole supply chain and taking the data into that platform. So we have and hold the complete history of all the products from end to end. The source actually, and this is the piece of hardware, is, like I said, agnostic. So we also can add other components. By the way, we have also an ecosystem of partners who, since no DC is the same, can customize and adapt to the existing situation. You might have a DC with a conveyor belt and a full automation. Some DCs are more manual. This requires actually a customizing and a unique read point design. And this is where we work together closely with partners from our ecosystem. But yes, the stock visibility platform is hardware agnostic.
Thank you, Tom. And then I think there's a little bit of a technical question, and that's how does RFID compare to the SSCC? Mm-hmm. And I think the SSCC is a GS1 standard, another GS1 standard that I'm not very familiar with, but I think you can explain maybe first what the SSCC is for the rest of the audience, and then explain how RFID compares to the SSCC.
Yes, the SSCC is the serial shipment container code. This is identifying the unit where the products belong to, like a box or also a pack of hanging garments. Of course, you also could register just the SSCC even with RFID. However, the crucial question is very often to verify the content of an SSCC, because the reality now already says that there are advice data per SSCC. Let's give you an example. Your supplier says, I send you a box with an SSCC code and 100 items in it. And we very often see that there are actually 100 items in it. However, on the item level, on the unique item level, there are very often size changes, color changes, which means you are operating then if you just confirm the SSCC and its advised content on wrong stock levels. And this is why we advise really to use RFID on the product level, on the unique item level, which is the content of the SSCC.
Great. Okay, there's a lot of questions coming in, which is very good. So let me see what's another one. So there's someone that's asking, say, okay, imagine a retailer with 2,000 stores. So it's a pretty big retailer. They have 3 to 7 DCs. What's the best way to use RFID with package collection from the nearest store to the customer?
I assume the question goes a little bit more towards the ship from store aspect, that we, as I mentioned, see a tendency that stores must also act like mini DCs. And of course, you can add a location information to the actual stock and calculate what is the best route to identify the nearest store to the customer. So here you combine the stock information, and RFID is providing real-time stock information with location information, and then add that to that process. This is possible, of course, yes, and helps to improve that process.
Great. Okay, then I will pick 2 more questions, then we're gonna end the webinar, but we will stay on and answer some more specific questions. So if your question is not yet answered and you would like to hear the answer to your question, we will stay live and answer those questions, but we also want to respect the time of the other participants. So Tom, and I think that's something that comes a little bit close to the previous question. So can you elaborate a bit more on the Ecom return operations? Will it be helpful in decreasing returns, or will it make it more streamlined?
So what's happening is like I told in the last slide, you are sending out the products to the customers as ordered online, and they will return it back. And where RFID helps is a 2-step approach. This is again a verification following the guiding principle of comparing a target list with the actual identified per RFID identified content, because a return process typically looks like the following: the customer needs you as a brand, as a retailer, to advise what he or she is sending back. And the workload happens in the DC by checking if it's actually in the box, in the bag, what the customer has advised to send back. And do a double check, of course, also with the quality to see if the item is resellable. This is a visual check, but to check if the right items are in the bag or in the box can be done automatically and seamlessly. So, and this very often is handled via a barcode scan or manually. Someone's printing out a list and needs to take a pen and check if the items are there as advised. And there RFID helps to really verify again if the right items have been sent back by the customer as advised. Of course, RFID will not replace the visual check if an item is still okay and still sellable. Yeah? But it eliminates the need of the tremendous work of registering items.
Great, thank you, Tom. And then one last question that we'll answer before we close the webinar, and that's a question from an existing user who is asking whether we are planning to extend the ID Cloud to include features for specialty DCs, or is it already there? So I think, and that's Tom, maybe you can explain that a little bit more, the difference between the user application and the EPCIS repository and where NetApp plays today.
Yeah, so the EPCIS repository is, I mentioned it a little bit, I tend to say the brain, yeah? Your brain of all product movements, giving you the information about stock, location, stock positions, and this in real time, connecting all the different silos of systems you have. The user application itself can come from NetApp, but also can be running in the background. What we do not want to do is replacing your existing systems. And very often we see that brands and retailers are operating in DC with a very good WMS, with the warehouse management system, and that you have functionality already there. And RFID is just added as a process towards existing business processes in the WMS. So my answer in short is it depends, but our core is to provide you with the EPCIS repository stock visibility platform, which is finally the centralized database that gives you all real-time stock information.
Okay, great. So more questions for those questions that are not yet answered, but we would like to close the webinar for those of you that need to go. So we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for participating. As mentioned in the beginning, this was the first in our series. So there will be another webinar next week, and we'll focus a bit on the myths of RFID, and we will try to debunk those myths. The time slots are the same. So it's on Tuesday the 7th and Wednesday the 8th at the time zones, at different times, depending on your time zone, of course, which you can see on the screen. As I mentioned, we are planning to post the recording of this webinar online. So you can find that at netapp-retail.com/resources/webinars. And that's also where you can find the registration link if you want to participate in next week's webinar again. Thank you so much for joining. And for those of you who want to stay on, please feel free and we'll answer some more of the questions that have been asked. Thank you so much.